Welcome everybody to another episode of The New Normal. And in this exciting taught episode, we will be discussing myths, and we will be doing a little myth busting, debunking the myths of online learning. And so today, each of the panelists is going to be talking a little bit about a particular myth or challenge, a bit of received wisdom around online learning. And hopefully we'll get a little cross discussion going as well. And with that in mind, who would like to start us off?
Well, I'm happy to, if we want to have a look at the myth of the digital native. So I do like the Mythbusters TV series. They're quite engaging, really, and I guess that's kind of a little bit of the inspiration for this episode as well. But I'm just going to drop into screen sharing just for a sec because I've got a couple of notes. So here's the our episode intro, debunking the myths of online learning, as Chris has brought us into, and I've got some notes here if people are interested, if they want to scan the QR code or write down the little short link there, which is using the University of Melbourne short link, go.unimelb.edu.au/ and it's pretty short, 2SGJ, all lowercase. I think even Brian will be able to handle that.
I think I did handle it.
Yeah, well done.
Got it, yeah.
So my myth that we're looking at, oops, oh, that's just the panelists. So welcome again to all the panelists. And I didn't quite get around to putting everyone else's Twitter addresses there, but I'll add those later. The Zoom link, if you are not in the session, well, there it is. The digital native. So Mark Prensky came up with this in about 2001, or perhaps a little bit before, but one of the key articles that he wrote was around 2001. So just on 20 years ago, just straight into the new millennium, seemed like an appropriate time. He was a game developer, and it very much played into, I guess, developing a market for his products, being the cynic. But really, I'm just blown away by how prevalent this myth is, and how many people still, seem to hold on to it, and the number of people that even write about it when I'm reviewing articles in various educational technology journals that talk about the digital native. The implications, I guess, are that effectively technology mastery is age-related, and the fact that our students are actually now born biologically different in their brains, so that they're wired differently to use technology from a very young age. I'd be keen to hear back from some of our medical practitioners about that. But anyway, and that students are basically masters of technology usage, and they can learn quite successfully in multitasking mode. So they can watch TV and game and chat and Facebook, etc., all at the same time very effectively. No one's debating that they do actually multitask. It's the effective part that I think we want to debate. And the other implication is that all of us as really old people, we're kind of stuffed. We're out of date, and technology has gone past us, and we just can't keep up. So really, the really bad effect of this is it creates this disconnect between formal education and students' use of educational technology, and their what they associate, what their experience will be. So some of the results are that lecturers take the opportunity to disengage with educational technology. It's a great excuse. I'm a digital immigrant, and therefore I can't use technology, and therefore I won't. So it's a great excuse factor.
I'll just quickly hop in too and say, Tom, that as somebody who's done a lot of development around this, I've encountered that I don't even know how many times, at least half a dozen, where somebody said exactly that. They said, look, because of my age, I should just accept the fact that I can't do this.
Yeah, it's kind of like almost saying, well, I'm half brain dead, so, forget learning. I just find it rather sad. And then the other result is that basically students have started to believe this themselves, and that they believe that they do know more with technology than their lecturers. And that their expectations of what technology will be actually be used in teaching and learning is incredibly low. They expect that there will be PowerPoint and email, and lots of surveys, particularly in the UK, have shown that's the limit of students' expectations of school leavers going into tertiary education, higher education. That's the level of technology they expect to engage with. And consequently, critical digital literacies and the professional use of technology are not modelled. So what's the reality? Well, technology's mastery is not related to age. I'm probably the oldest person on this panel, but I'm sure I could run rings around most teenagers in the use of technology. Even my grandkids, I teach them stuff they don't know. Hey, Gramps, how do I do this? And students engage with technology for social reasons, not for educational reasons. That's the key way they use technology, and that's what we observe. And that's it's more about their standing within the social connection of social media, etc. Not about a critical use of technology. If you look at some of the Netflix series around technology and its impact on society, some of those are quite interesting. And students certainly don't engage in a professional network because they don't have those professional networks yet. And it also affects their concept of e-portfolios because they do not have a professional approach to building an e-portfolio yet. The other result is that students really tend to be consumers of content. There's very few that actually produce content and share it and upload it. So the myth that every student is creating a YouTube channel and as an influencer is also untrue. So really we need to model critical engagement with technology, particularly within educational profession and professional domains. And students need scaffolding. As soon as we start bringing into the education experience technology that our students are not used to, so anything beyond Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, they actually do need scaffolding to know how to use those tools because they haven't used them. So what are some alternatives? Well, there's been a really good concept. It's been around for a long time now, visitors and residents, where it's about where you spend your time and effort and energy, not about your age. And so, if you're highly engaged with technology, then you know about it and you know how to apply it, hopefully. The OCLC, which now stands for OCLC rather than the whatever it used to stand for. It's a bit like IEEE now stands for IEEE. They have a really nice online tool where you can create your own technology usage map and actually have a bit of a graphical overview of what technology do you engage with and how within a social or professional domain, as a visitor or as a resident. And by doing that and doing that as an exercise for your students, you can quickly see the technologies that they do engage with and how. And then it gives you the opportunity to talk into that space and say, how about we use some technologies you currently don't use and use them in the professional domain. And the other concept I think is much more useful than a digital native is learner-centric ecology of resources. So anyway, I've probably talked a bit too much here, but I just wanted to also very quickly point out that if you do, even just do a quick Google search on the digital native myth, you can see there's just a whole bunch of stuff there. It's and even just look at some of the imagery around the critique of the digital native is not something that only a small group of people are doing or is new. It's the literature's there that shows that it's a myth. And if we want to look at Google Scholar and see academic writing, there's a huge body of work around that. So I'm just kind of stunned that people still buy into this. And I've just got to think, well, really, it's people haven't done their homework. So other thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. I think that's really interesting that I think COVID-19 pandemic has really challenged this assumption and this myth in a way that it forced people to use technology while isolating many older generations, grandparents, and never even come close to computer, now is Zooming and WhatsApping with the grandchildren overseas like never before. So I think that pandemic really create opportunity for us to debunk the myths and really force people to, they say, oh, you don't have to be native. You can be immigrant at whatever age you are. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think my my personal experience of teenagers is, and I went to my second round of teenagers because we've had another round before this, who are now in their 30s. It absolutely agrees with this, your, I suppose, findings or your research, Thomas, so that the way the young people do use internet is socially, and they are very good at socially, but it doesn't translate to necessarily understanding the skills for going to university and using university tools in a sophisticated way. But I think your point about people using it as an excuse, it's part of the reason why it's still around, is because it is convenient. People want to believe this because it gives them an out. And
That's kind of sad, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not the scientific base we are really encouraging.
I'm also pretty sure I'll probably be upsetting a few people by making those comments, but that's the reality, isn't it?
Well, it is the reality, and it fits within a larger reality too that picks up on something that Kate mentioned in the text, which is her current bugbear is seeing learning styles referenced, and I'm right there with her because my background is teacher education. And even when I was doing my doc, people were questioning things like learning styles, Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. But, years later, we still cling on to these ideas tenaciously, despite absence of evidence, despite rigorous attempts to produce any kind of a data set that demonstrates that these are actually what they claim to be or do what they claim to do, whether it's defining somebody as a digital native and that there's actually some kind of a transformation, as you mentioned, Thom, maybe even on a physical level, or whether we really do have these different parts of our mind that are, this is this kind of learning and this is that kind of learning. We cling to these things. Yeah, it's tough to get rid of them.
Mm. Be careful what you publish.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Oh, dear.
Well, I don't mind going next, since we're also on the subject of potentially upsetting the apple cart. And I think certainly what I'm about to talk about has that potential too. And that is the idea of remote proctoring. And this is something, of course, that is very much on people's mind these days, with the idea of moving into online examinations. And as we know, we are just coming out from a semester where people had to make difficult triage style emergency decisions in subjects that often required that there be an examination, or with not enough time to switch out from that. And some universities have decided to keep to the classic university examination structure, which is an invigilated, proctored, closed book examination. And so these services like Examity, ProctorU have been offering the notion that you can replicate the conditions of a seated in-person closed book exam in the privacy of students' home. And so this is one of those, accept the premise issues, which is when I was at another university, I was tasked with exploring this and saying, well, you know, which is the right one for us? Because we're very concerned with student privacy. We're very concerned with the legitimacy of the service. But of course, that operates on a premise, which is that any of that can work. And so far, there's really no evidence. Perhaps worse yet, these companies are actually actively rejecting efforts on the part of a lot of researchers to partner with them and conduct empirical research into the impact and the efficacy of their products. I won't mention any names. I won't, you know, ruffle too many feathers, but I have been talking with some people who are very deep into this kind of research, and that they've said that they have been aggressively rebuffed from several major companies. Interestingly, not every company does this around every integrity product. For example, there's an excellent piece of anti-plagiarism service software that would be familiar to everyone, that's long-standing, that routinely partners with university researchers to determine the efficacy of their product and to fine-tune it. So certainly this is not a wholesale expectable rejection. It's worth pointing out too that even if you were able to show that these things do what they're supposed to do, that says nothing about the unintended consequences to privacy. And I will follow Thom's lead here, and I'm going to put up something on screen. Actually, if I could get a co-host status, Thom, and then I can share my screen. Super. Okay, let me see. I've got a new computer here, so. Can you see? What do you see? Do you see anything? No?
That's the issue, Chris. If this is the first time you've run Zoom on a new computer, then you can't screen share
okay,
until you reboot Zoom.
Here's what I'll do. I'll quickly talk people through it. There are multiple articles now coming out from, well, what did this last semester look like from universities that chose to use remote proctoring? And some of the titles of these include mass school closures in the wake of the coronavirus are driving a new wave of student surveillance. That's Washington Post. Privacy concerns raised over exam provider, ... Again, I won't mention names. And they go on from there, including, by the way, what appears to be now an EU lawmaker probe into online proctoring privacy. So there are some real consequences here. And I'm very concerned that, like the myth of the digital native, by taking this as received wisdom, we're actually engaged in policies and practices that, number one, we can't necessarily support from the point of view of validity, and number two, may carry significant consequences that we just never intended.
Yeah, and as you have alluded to, Chris, a lot of it's really about money and keeping your income stream going, isn't it? Around some of these myths.
Yeah, it can be. It absolutely can be. And these solutions, they grow increasingly expensive the closer in you want to get. So a very generalized proctoring solution that may use, for example, eye and facial recognition detections and algorithms might cost you at this price point. But the company even that I dealt with, which was talking us through this, said, well, yes, that's a good solution, but of course, we can't really guarantee because it's computer. So what you really want is that you want live human beings watching your students, just like in real life. Well, of course, that's our platinum package. Well, they didn't call it the platinum package, but I mean, they might as well have, right? So yeah, a lot of it is upselling.
What is more creepy, being watched by a human or by an algorithm?
Right.
Yeah, and once you let them once, are they still there when you turn off the button?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I didn't realize that they were actively resisting, looking at their products critically, for want of a better word. I mean, you can understand the demand there. Like, people do just want to replicate the exam experience. They want to have that assurance it's just the same. And so people have obviously, companies have fulfilled that demand because it has been there. And but yeah, they're not actually prepared to look at it in detail about whether their product's doing what it should be doing, and providing the assurances it supposedly is. And it's not good. It's not good. And then, of course, then there's the whole thing we've talked about in previous sessions about assessment redesign, and the benefits of that.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a presupposition there that we must somehow preserve this paradigm of closed book classic examinations, when, of course, in reality, if you look at the history of examinations, and I wrote a piece on this a few years ago about the history of the Chinese imperial examination, what you're really looking at is a compromise in itself. There's many ways to examine and understand quality. They were simply using the paradigm that was afforded to them given the technology at the time. What we've done is we've clung onto this as a legacy and elevated the form to the function. But in reality, of course, what we really have to do is we have to accurately and legitimately assess people. And so we should explore new forms as they present themselves.
And interestingly, even back then they cheated, because they used to have handkerchiefs, cheating handkerchiefs, where the notes were written. So it's been around a long time.
I was really interested, Chris, in the response you got in the lead up to semester 1 examinations, given you wrote that paper about alternatives to invigilated high stakes assessment. What was the kind of tone of the interactions you were having with academic staff? Were you able to convince them that some of the methods that you had proposed were as valid, as reliable, as legitimate as the exam format?
The responses were very positive, Brian, and I don't want to sound cynical when I say surprisingly so, but I was expecting a greater degree of pushback. But I think that, this situation of everyone being rapidly and catastrophically forced into a new paradigm really did disrupt a lot of the old patterns of thinking. When I was talking these same concepts through a year and a half ago, 2 years ago at another university, I did encounter a great deal more resistance. And I would argue that maybe this disruption provides us exactly the opportunity to have people interrogate their own assumptions.
And it's a sustained disruption as well. I think that's probably the key. Is it's not just 2 weeks and then we're back to normal. It's months, maybe even years. So it certainly provides a platform for significant change, doesn't it?
I'll just quickly give props to Kate in the chat feature, and I hope that we can capture this in some way and perhaps put this in, because I think she's providing some fantastic stuff on who exactly can be disadvantaged in these processes and what some key documents are that are coming out around remote proctoring.
With that, I might come in to really talk about my perspective of the myth. If that's okay, I felt that it can link in quite well with Kate's questions, as well as Chris' provocation. Really coming to what is universities for in that question. Is the university being a public institution with civic duties, but operated in quite with private characters, with it's quite commercialized, if talking about revenues and income generations. So when looking at adopting digital platforms into learning and teaching and assessment, and to what extent is that increase and boost public trust in the university. So when we talk about the issue of surveillance and then the issue of algorithm, and it generally comes from a large amount of trust in student and the public that the university is going to handle this information, the personal information, in great care, almost not questioning that level of security. So I think that we are in this time that, it's pandemic, and then we rethink and reset what we are doing next. These questions of, like we are already experiencing a huge decrease of public trust to major large institution, not just a university. Really rethink about when student cheating, it's a manner of bridging trust. So really, again, from the macro level to bringing down to the individual level, how do we really translate that, the idea that digital platforms is actually safer and then more secure and is trusting to internal and external community? I think that really open for conversations among all of us. What do you think about that?
I think you're spot on, and yeah, sort of. I won't go into my spiel, but I think it's very important to consider that impact of this rapid shift to online, and that idea of students being safe associated with surveillance. So yeah, that is a very concerning thing, that we automatically think that to some extent having access to all of this extra data will enable us to do really good things for the student. We might be able to nudge them or have interventions to help them, but those kind of things start to carry a bit of a surveillant overtone and can impact on how the students actually behave in those environments.
I know that we did a bit of research about this last year with the students, and what came back to date anyway, and I think it's a changing field, is that students are okay with surveillance of their educational work when it's relevant to their education, when it's relevant to their learning, but they're not okay with anything that gets beyond that, that it's, so that there's a real, they feel like you should be using their data in a meaningful way in the realm of teaching and learning, but there's a definite boundary there. But I think the external companies having data is something we've got to be really careful about, and who gets their data and why they're starting to ask a lot of questions. More this year than ever. I think I've said this before.
Yeah, and in a previous life, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been super excited right now, because we've got this big shift to online learning. All of a sudden, I'm going to be able to advocate for more useful use of learning analytics, because most of the activity is now happening online, and I think I would have been quite excited about that. But I've recently sort of been rethinking that perspective to say, well, okay, we have all of this extra data, but what sort of data is it, and what is it about? And we kind of have that idea of actually turning students into data, or they become like a digitally shorn self, which is, I think, something that David Lyon wrote about. And that becomes quite concerning in terms of, we start to make decisions as educators based on this kind of shadow identity, not on the basis of the actual real person that is sitting there before us. So we might be making decisions about what they did in the virtual learning environment in the past, what they're doing now, but that's only just like this tiny fraction of who they are and what they're about. So it can be quite problematic.
It's a really good point, Brian, that we may be reconstructing what we think about as our students according to the available data, as opposed to according to who these people actually are. And of course, if we're making any policy decisions, curriculum decisions based on that information, if we're fitting that into any kind of an evaluation cycle, how can that not have a negative wash back into the curriculum?
Yeah, and your online presence is only a subset of your overall personality, character, etc. as well. And you can have quite easily multiple representations of yourself online for different communities and groups that you're speaking into, including, you know, your education community. So how do you knit those all together?
That can be very staged.
Yeah, definitely.
Ooh, yeah, I really want to talk about that. But there's one other thing that sort of popped into my mind there for a second. But yeah, there's the use of the algorithms in response to the data is again a bit of a worry. So as educators, you know, we like to have notions where we'd like to encourage environments where students self-direct, self-regulate. But if the algorithms are, you know, to use Heidegger's term, leaping in for the student and nudging them in a particular direction constantly, then that's actually notionally taking away like our care for them and taking away their ability to self-regulate. And I think one author that I read described it as almost a potential for a total loss of human agency. Like that's probably a bit dramatic, but it's a perspective that's worth keeping in mind when we start to sort of adopt these technologies uncritically.
Yeah. It's interesting, Siew Fang's point about trust in the university and trust around technology, because in some level, trust in the university has gone down because of this online, going fully online, and people are thinking that the education isn't as of quality, including the students, you know, articulating it themselves for various reasons. So there's already a perception there around technology and trust, and whether it's the same quality experience, whether that's played out in reality or not. I don't know if you've got anything to say about that, Siew Fang?
Well, I actually think that's a two-way thing. That one is a public trust to the university and public trust to technology. The other one is that the university is not trusting the students, and so, you know, like we need more, you know, surveilling, we need policing, we need to make sure that they're being properly monitored in the discussion board. And so there are kind of an interesting relational dynamic that is play out, and by introducing the technology as a medium, and yet the role of academic as and lecturers as in that intermediate, as what Brian mentioned, that it's actually really put us into a really new responsibility to rethink about what are we doing. Are we policing, or are we building trust when we using those technology in educating our next generation? So yeah, I felt that the two-way relational trust, institutional trust, a trusting institution is interesting.
Yeah.
So Audrey Waters, who had a blog recently about there's too much cop, four-letter word in education at the moment, and it was quite a powerful, provocative piece, but it was all along the lines of what you've been talking about, Siew Fang, where it's just too much discipline, too much control, too much feeling like you're being policed rather than being educated.
Funny thing to say to Victorians right now.
Yeah, it's kind of part and parcel. It's not, but it's also not new. It's not specific to what we're going through right now, is it?
Yeah.
It is this idea that universities, not all, but a lot, have been positioning technology as a means to enhancing surveillance of students, although they wouldn't call it that. What it is often put under is the rubric of academic integrity. And a point that I've raised sometimes in the development work I'm doing around what we should be doing with online assessment is, first of all, when people say academic integrity, the next words out of their mouth usually are cheating or plagiarism. And of course, academic integrity means not doing that. You know, you shouldn't necessarily define something by its negative. And so the first place for us to be talking about academic integrity, and perhaps technologies facilitating that, should be around the positive aspects of how we can have dialogues with students so that they begin acting with the integrity, or simply begin understanding what our definition of integrity is. because we can't overlook the potential for cultural misunderstandings around what constitutes academic integrity. So before we even begin using technology for surveillance, I think we should be using it for something that's frankly a lot nicer and more productive.
I guess, you know, those behaviorist type of approaches are often the cheap approach, and it's driven by, you know, what's cost effective in this, and perhaps not so much around the effective either. It's more just about what's the cheapest.
And that pressure is going to become greater with what's going on in universities at the moment.
I just like to really think a little bit about how the other innovations like Uber and Airbnb, they operated based on trust. You know, that really allow agency for individual to give review and feedback. Again, it's a very different way of really, you know, like no one will ever, you know, think of getting a stranger to come to your home and stay, or invite a total stranger to come inside your car and have a ride together, I think 10 years ago. And it became popular, and because of the system that is in place to maximize, really underpin trust, and that, you know, like it has to be transparent, it has to be open, and we have verified identity. So again, the people buying into it and then actually felt quite safe and comfortable in unimaginable circumstances to enter somebody's properties and somebody's car, and to share, drive, and that narrative of you know, sharing is actually a very different paradigm than the policing kind of narrative. So to me, my question is that for the university to adopt new technology into learning and teaching, if we really could think about how can we build trust into our process and design, it could be phenomenal.
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah.
I know there are a few other points too that some folks wanted to raise, and I would invite other people to maybe bust a few more myths, maybe, the time we have remaining.
I should jump in with a myth I really wanted to bust, which was about converting people who have very rapidly converted their subjects to an online format for the sort of emergency online learning, I suppose. And I really want to bust the myth that it's worked well when they've replicated what they did in the face-to-face environment. So, for example, a common structure we see in how subjects are designed are a 1 hour or 2 hour lecture per week, and then a 1 or 2 hour tutorial per week. And so the logical conversion of that, or the easy conversion of that, is to turn it into 2 hours of lectures. That could be over Zoom or just an hour recording of a video of a lecturer talking, and then 2 hour tutorials, and bang, you got your online format. And this really flies in everything we have learned about online learning and what works and what doesn't. It also flies in the face of what works as far as the affordances of the technology and what you could do with it, given what it is. You know, it's sort of ignoring almost the affordances of the technology. So for something like taking your hour lecture and turning it into an hour video, which did happen, it's really it doesn't even really reflect the lecture experience, because in reality no one goes in and just talks for an hour. There's times for reflections, there's time for questions, there's time for, you know, think peer share type activities. All that stuff happens in that hour, and typically we've found in the video team have found that a lecture can be cut down to 20 to 30 minutes worth of content that would actually be as part of a video. And you wouldn't even put that as one video, you would put it as little chunks of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, that type of thing, and interspread it with the activities that you would have had in that lecture, like a reflection piece or a group activity. And so, you know, you'd ask the student to watch the video, you would then get them to perhaps you could even get them to do a little quiz, and then you might get them to have a discussion, and then you would get them to watch another video. So really want to challenge that thinking that, one, lots and lots of synchronous activity is good in an online environment, and you can understand why people want to do that. the nature is to connect, or just repeat the connection at the same level, but it doesn't translate to good online learning. In fact, I've got a nice diagram, so you give me a little piece of power to share. I think, is Thomas able to give me the power to share? I've only got one picture. Cool. I'll go share. It's not my diagram. It's, can you see it? Or are you just seeing my screen? No.
Yeah, we can see that.
Did you see the diagram?
Yeah, it was there, but now it's gone.
Let's try again then. Yeah, it's that one, share. You know why I get the green line around it, but I'm not. And you can see here, a face-to-face session would have, you know, lots of synchronous activity, and it's great. And if you're lucky, a little bit of asynchronous, something online, where this is a suggestion of what makes good online learning. You don't want to get rid of asynchronous altogether. It has a great value, but the reality is you're actually wanting a lot more asynchronous activity. And that's because this diagram is done by Zach Groschel, who from a blog post he did. But that's because also the affordance of the technology allowing students who are remote, you know, we've got students who are not in Australia now. And if you book synchronous activity at times, it can be really not work for them. They might have home duties, might be looking after small children at this current time, that sort of thing. So you really want to take advantage of the asynchronous nature of the online, but not get rid of synchronous altogether. So I suppose that's my real challenge to put out there. I don't know if anyone else wants to say about what they think about translating, you know, the face-to-face experience to an online version.
So sometimes it's not just about what's best practice, though. Often it's what people are used to, and so, you know, students have been completely, you know, bought into the being pacified in lecture, want the same experience online, which is sad. But you know, so just tell us what we need to know online, and are you going to lecture us about this instead of let's get engaged and do some, you know, self-directed activity. So there can be kickback.
And that tension doesn't have to be, isn't just going online. If you take your model and flip it and do the flip classroom and get students more active, you can get a lot of pushback and sort of like, no, I just want to hear from the expert and write my essay. I don't want to have this interactive experience with my peers. So it's not that criticism of kind of being more active in the learning process kind of goes beyond the technology, I suppose.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been thinking about, Kat, is like educators maybe need to start taking a bit of a leaf out of the architect's book and start thinking about the kind of spaces that they're exposing students to, and trying to choose the appropriate space for the kind of learning experience or outcome that they're going after. So like a bit of emphasis on spatiality. What is this space? Is it suitable for the purpose at hand? And I guess what you're getting at with the Zoom being used as a replacement proxy for synchronous face-to-face learning is that people probably aren't really thinking through what kind of a space Zoom is and what sort of properties it has and what that leads to in terms of the way that students engage with each other and the lecturer in Zoom. I'm in a cohort of 60 at the moment, and we meet for an hour on a Monday night, and I think only about 8 students turn their cameras on in that environment. And to go to Kate's point about the myth of students turning up to Zoom as engaging, I can guarantee that 40 of those students are, I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're definitely not engaged in what's going on. And there is, like, I've sort of been talking around my myth, which was this notion of surveillance learning environments. And Zoom is a really interesting example because it has not only that kind of panoptic effect of one person being able to watch everyone, it's actually a synopticon, so it's the power of the many watching the one. So students probably feel quite a lot of pressure when they're on the Brady Bunch screen and everyone's looking at them. So you then have to have this kind of performance element coming into what you're doing in Zoom, and is that really something that's conducive to good educational outcomes? I'm not sure.
I'm a great believer of no matter any synchronous event, whether it's in a room, in Zoom, any time you're getting people to come together, it has to be a really good reason. The reason of just coming together so you listen to me talk is not good enough anymore. And you know, you do need to be designing activities. You do need to be, like, you know, unpacking problems, looking at case studies, that type of activity, not didactic type of talking. As soon as you get people together, and I think if anything that comes out of COVID is that we really think more critically about why we bring people together and what we do with them when we bring them together, whether that's in a room or in Zoom.
That also filters down to things like lecturers' self-conception as well. You know, I've had lecturers say to me, the whole definition of a lecturer is students come and listen to me. And is that optimal learning? Well, I don't think so.
Yeah, well,
that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah. But there is no reason. There's no reason to sit and listen to someone anymore. You can watch the recording.
I've had that same experience actually with someone talking about readings as well, saying why when we're putting this online learning together, can you say before you put the link to the reading, say why students should do the reading? And the response was, because I said so. And that's still not that unusual. It's not just about online learning, but it's very much more obvious in an online environment that the charisma that people have getting people to do things, and all of the implicit things that staff do, teaching staff do, to housekeeping, for foregrounding what's going to happen next and why, and what the narrative is around it, and, you know, what they're going to get out of it. People are doing that automatically, but if it's in an online environment, which means that they might not be doing it mindfully. So it's a big change to do that in an online and pre-prepared environment, and then you have to sort of front load all those things, and that's one of the things that takes quite a lot of thinking sometimes to get to that point.
That forward planning and designing is needed to do it well.
I think we do have a little bit of time left, and so if we think there's one burning desire, something that's really been bugging you as a myth or a bit of received wisdom.
A myth. It's cheaper.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cheaper, and that you can teach more people at once.
Yeah.
And that it's going to take away our jobs. That's one that I'm still hearing. And I'm thinking, no, those jobs went, 20 years ago. Because 20 years ago, we were in 12 people tutorials, and we've been in 27 people tutorials for a very long time now. So the jobs have gone, and this is trying to, prop up an understaffed, over-studented, like a system that's already here, not trying to replace something that's inefficient, but just trying to rescue something that is already, on its, hanging by a thread.
And if you can be replaced by a robot or AI, then perhaps you should be.
Why not? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think the going to the turning up type thing as engagement, the clickability argument in learning technologies, where people think, oh, people are clicking around, or I've got this thing where students have to click through it and do stuff, that means they're engaged. Like, that's one that still does the rounds that really annoys me, I must admit.
You can measure engagement by clicks. It doesn't actually show any learning whatsoever. Yeah.
We were talking about this recently in Melbourne Teaching Certificate, which, for those of you who are watching this who aren't in the UniMelb community, is it's an internal certification process for teaching and learning in higher education, and it's course-based. And we were talking about engagement, and it was this idea that, is that engagement? Sure, but it's facile. And if we look at surface and deep learning, or surface and deep teaching, maybe we should look at surface and deep engagement too. And so many of the metrics around online learning stack up on the surface end of that spectrum, don't they? And don't necessarily allow us intimate understandings of if and how and whether our students are engaged in complex ways.
It also assumes that engagement means that everyone is having fun and enjoying the experience, rather than often learning is actually really hard, you know, and you need to push people, push them beyond, you know, when you're thinking about exercise, you don't gain any muscle until you push beyond your limit. So same thing with, you know, engaging your brain.
Yeah. To be fun and easy.
Yeah.
No.
No, I really appreciate your point, Chris, about the deep or surface engagement. I think this is something that, to me, I really should dig further about this. That's one is that how do we measure engagement? That's that drive behavior, and the others is you know, like whether engagement has translated into academics have to become an entertainer, and then we need to, you know, like the content could not be too boring, because it's, you know, student-centered learning is all about the student. The student go through the article, just like flip through it these days. So the content has to be bite-sized, and then it has to be digestible, and then, you know, it had to be entertaining, and so that they will come back. So it's again, you know, like the deep learning is hard, just like Thom was mentioning, and yet how do we really navigate this, you know, the nuances, so that we can actually educate critical thinking, but not really compromise that we're losing our students while engaging in deep engagement.
Right. I don't think we'll lose our students, because when you look at some of the research that's been done, for example, in Asia around challenging assumptions of surface and depth learners, because there are all these rather unpleasant myths about Confucian heritage learners, and that they are, oh, it's all about rote memorization and surface level. But when you actually do the research, you find that that's simply not the case, and that often you have students who crave deep engagement and are perfectly willing to engage in challenging experiences in the process. I think it is more a neoliberal box-ticking perspective that tends to embrace education as entertainment and educators as the entertainers. I really don't buy this myth that it's the students who are driving the idea of education as entertainment. And in fact, I would say that's a good kind of myth to bust right on the heels of this one. Yeah, I don't think so. I think students want quality. And I think that they're willing to put in the effort if they feel like we're putting in the effort to give it.
Netflix is a lot cheaper for entertainment.
Better production budget too, you know? My special effects are lousy. Well, we've just about come to the end of our hour, and I think we've taken on some pretty interesting myths, and hopefully have done so in a way that is informative and engaging, and will lead us forward into some more interesting novel topics as the new normal continues. And so with that, I'll say thank you to all of the panelists and our two live guests. And I look forward to seeing you all in a month.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you,
Chris.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
That was great.
Thank you.